Today, we are diving into mission-driven leadership and how our newest professional development program, the Elevated Leadership Program, incorporates personal and organizational purpose to help participants develop as leaders and motivate their teams. As you may know, the Yale School of Management's mission is to educate leaders for business and society. The school's mission, coupled with the Elevated Leadership Program's vision of developing purposeful leaders across organizations, across sectors, inspired this webinar today. So what does it take to be mission-driven? What does it mean to be mission-driven? In this webinar, Professor Barron, whom I'll introduce in a moment, will share research-backed insights that we hope will help you on your own leadership journey. One tool Professor Barron will employ today is exploring a case study. So this approach is didactic in nature, and it fits the needs of this webinar. We have a short amount of time together, and we're here to impart some helpful insights to you succinctly. However, the learning experience of the Elevated Leadership Program is markedly different if you were to attend. The Elevated Leadership Program is a blended program hosted by the Yale School of Management. Blended here means part of the program is delivered live online to the comfort of you in your home or your office, and part of the program is delivered on campus in one of our classrooms. The program is designed to strengthen critical leadership capabilities, develop your authentic leadership style, and translate leadership insights into actions. And it does this through assessments, through coaching, through discussions, through learning and action projects that encourage you to reflect and to act throughout the entire program. So we know that the most effective way for adult learners to absorb new lessons is through application, and that's what you'll be doing alongside a cohort of peers. We are hosting the Elevated Leadership Program this fall, September 10th through October 17th, and I will drop the program page link into the chat for you to explore further, unless Rachel beats me to it. Now it's my pleasure to introduce Professor James Barron. Professor Barron is the Faculty Director of the Elevated Leadership Program and the William S. Beinecke Professor of Management at the Yale School of Management. Professor Barron's research interests include human resources, organizational design and behavior, social stratification and inequality, work, labor markets and careers, economic sociology, and entrepreneurial companies. Welcome, Professor Barron.
Thank you, Kristen. Good afternoon or evening or morning, depending on where you are. I'm delighted to have this chance to spend a little time with you and talk about the challenges and opportunities of leading mission-driven organizations. As Kristen kind of intimated, I'd like this to be as participative as possible. So if you have questions, please feel free to put them in the chat or raise your hand, and Kristen's going to try to ensure that I flag those questions. So the premise for this webinar is that when I talk to leaders, and I'm fond of asking this question of what do you need more of from your people? What are you striving to generate more of among your workforce? And the kinds of behaviors that I often hear about, whether we're talking about healthcare or finance or consumer goods, the kinds of things that come up on managers' lists are things like this, like innovation, creativity, teamwork, getting people to act with integrity and responsibility, promoting goals around sustainability, promoting goals around diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, getting people to create and transfer knowledge across silos within the organization, and getting people to engage customers or clients in a truly empathetic kind of way. Hopefully, at least one of two of those resonate with you. And I would suggest that if those are the kinds of behaviors that you're striving to inculcate, they're not very amenable to the traditional carrots and sticks that we teach in business school for how to reward and punish folks. And my premise is going to be that to get these kinds of behaviors, you need a different posture among the people you're leading. You need them not just to be motivated or involved, but you need them to have deep skin in the game or to be engaged. I'm going to use that term, engagement. I see there's a hand up. Anne?
Anne, if you can go ahead and unmute yourself.
All right, well, let's come back to, we'll come back to you, Anne.
Okay.
And so this challenge of getting people engaged is captured by the parable of the chicken and the pig. I can't tell you how long it took me online to find a picture of a chicken with a pig, but I did finally find one. And the parable of the chicken and the pig is captured by the question, in a bacon and egg breakfast, what is the difference between the chicken and the pig? And the answer is that the chicken participated, but the pig was engaged. Right? Now, I'm not suggesting that's literally the level of engagement that we need from employees, but you get the idea of the difference between making a contribution and having profound skin in the game. And so my premise for the webinar is going to be that for the people that you are leading and trying to inspire, harnessing engagement is going to require a rethinking around how you motivate people, moving beyond the concept of motivation to the concept of inspiration, of there being some deep purpose that inspires people, moving away from just a focus on incentives to providing people with compelling purposes that drive their behavior, moving beyond just focusing on what's in people's heads to thinking about tapping into what's in their heart, and that it's going to require leadership that's inspired and driven by an emphasis on mission, vision, and purpose. And I should say that I'm not presuming that all of you set the mission for your entire organization, but I am presuming that you have control over something, and that something could have a mission, and that something should have a mission. And so you as a leader should be thinking about, for that part of the enterprise over which you have responsibility, are you articulating and reinforcing a compelling mission? What I mean by mission and purpose is nicely captured by this quote from a former Yale faculty member, Jim Phils, who defines mission as kind of the juice that gets you jumping out of bed in the morning. It's the reason why you get up and come to work beyond just a paycheck or having a larger swimming pool. So it taps into something that is about fundamental human values and something that's intrinsically important, making a contribution to somebody or something that you care deeply about. And attention to mission and purpose are everywhere these days. On the left, you see Simon Sinek. Many of you may know his famous TED Talk, which is about starting with why, and his book by the same same title. Ernst & Young a few years ago created a whole new part of their consulting practice called the Beacon Institute that's focused entirely on helping their corporate customers tap into purpose and mission as a way of driving competitive advantage. And tons of books on this topic. So emphasizing mission and purpose, I think, become particularly important if any of you are, like every manager that I interact with, scratching your head around millennials and Gen Z, who report in survey after survey that making a difference is fundamentally important to them. So this survey done a few years back, 84% of millennials surveyed said making a difference in the world was somewhat or very important to them, more important so than professional recognition. And Gen Z tells us that when they make decisions about where they want to work or what they're going to buy, company purpose is absolutely critical. So I want to look a little bit at an organization that I think has done a quite effective job at tapping into mission. And it's a case study that we developed here some years ago at the Yale School of Management. And the reason that I like the case study is that it's not about an organization that's striving to cure cancer or end global hunger or do something where you might think it's obvious that there would be a deeply compelling mission. But it's a company that makes chairs. And it's a company by the name of Herman Miller, which you may know is now part of Miller Knoll. They were acquired a few years ago. And a number of years ago, their then CEO tasked his a team of employees throughout the company to come up with a new mission. And they came up with the mission, inspiring designs to help people do great things. Now, the CEO, a guy by the name of Brian Walker, here who's shown on the left, was a numbers guy. He was an accountant. So he was somewhat skeptical about this. He didn't want to just adopt a mission that was a vacuous slogan. So he spent a lot of time thinking about whether this was a viable mission for Herman Miller. And I want to show you two very short video clips of Brian talking to his senior leadership team at an offsite on the topic of mission and strategy. And in this video clip, he begins by talking about how his teenage son, Sam, and his wife, Colleen, were going to the eye doctor because Sam needed to get new contact lenses.
Sam and Colleen were going that day to an eye appointment that he had. Middle of the day, I get this note, a text message saying, "We got a problem. We're at the eye doctor. We need to talk to you right away." I waited a few minutes. I called her back. I say, "Hey, what's going on?" He says, "Well, I went to get my contacts updated, and they went through and they said I got an eye disease." Oh, okay. Well, what is it? Well, it's called retinitis pigmentosa. Oh, okay. What does that mean? He says, "They said I'm going to go blind." Whoa. The world sort of stops immediately. You know, you're kind of in this freak out. So at that point, to be honest, I kind of thought this is probably an overreaction. It's probably one of those things that with enough drugs or doctors, you'll figure it out, you'll solve it. So I say, okay, you guys go home. Let me start doing some work. So I quickly jump on the computer, start doing the Google search. And the first article I get says, if you have this disease, there's two things you should know. A, it's not curable. There's a lot of research being done, but it's very rare. There's 50 to 100,000 people, so there's not a lot of money going into it. The second thing you should know is if you want to know what you should do, buy a cane and learn Braille.
So Brian continues to research this disease, and he discovers that the leading institute working on it is at the University of Iowa, a place called the Carver Eye Clinic, run by a Dr. Stone. And Brian decides he's going to go fly there and talk to the people there and learn more about what's being done to fight this disease. And while he's there, he's given a tour by the head scientist there, who's a gentleman by the name of Bud Tucker.
The person who took us on the tour was a head researcher. His name was Bud. And I start talking to Bud about why he was there. He was one of the guys that came from Harvard. And he said he grew up in one of the Canadian provinces, like New Brunswick or something, small town, went to Harvard, said, geez, I just didn't really like the atmosphere. Met Dr. Stone and he recruited me out here to do this work. And he said, I'm the head stem cell guy. And in his office was something that was really interesting. He was sitting in an embodied chair. Now, he didn't know who I was at this point, so I said, "Hey, Bud, I'm curious, what about the chair?" And he goes, "Well," he says, "funny story." He says, "When Dr. Stone recruited me out here, he brought me in and they were showing me all the stuff that they had, and he asked me if there was one thing that I really needed. And I said, yeah, I need this embodied chair." And he goes, "Because I knew that Harvard had bought my chair with money in their fund, and I couldn't take it with me. So he said, I told Dr. Stone I had to have an embodied chair." I said, "Well, that's pretty cool." I said, "Well, why'd you have to have an embodied chair?" He said, "Well, I'm here all day trying to build these stem cells, and it's really tedious. And I'm staring into the screen all the time, and this was the only thing I've ever been able to find that I could sit for a long enough period of time to actually get my work done. If I get distracted, I can lose a whole day easily." I said, "Well, you're going to think this is funny." I said, "I happen to be the CEO of the company that makes that chair." So Bud and I had this really interesting connection. So as you think about that mission of inspiring designs to help people do great things, yeah, we're not curing blindness, but maybe we're making it possible. Maybe we're making it possible. Because I would tell you, that's the first piece of equipment Bud asked for in this hospital, in this lab, that's actually trying to figure out how to grow retina stem cells.
So Brian says that it was immediately after this meeting that he walked out into the hallway, called back to headquarters and told his people that he was okay going ahead with the mission of inspiring designs that help people do great things. So I want to open this up a little bit and ask you in the chat, if you would, based on these short clips of this guy, how would you describe Brian Walker as a leader in one word? What adjective comes to mind? And I'll try to catalog these if I can. Okay, open-minded, curious, determined. Sorry. Compassionate, good, like that. Empathetic, authentic, great. Balanced, okay. I'm not 100% sure what that means. Okay, open, agile, great. Inspiring, good. Reflective, okay. Great. Like all those, any others come to mind? Are there ways in which he strikes you as different than your stereotype of the CEO of a large publicly traded company? Somebody says proactive, humble. Yeah, right. Very much, you see in kind of how he dresses, how he talks. Seems very, approachable. Anything else? I mean, I think, there's that part in the video where his voice chokes up, where he talks about hearing about this disease that his son has got. It's more, I think, emotion than we're accustomed to seeing CEOs, sometimes give in their public speeches. Yeah, passionate. And I guess I would add one other adjective. This is a great list. Vulnerable, I'll add that one too. But, I think the guy's a pretty darn good storyteller. And indeed, I'm told that at Herman Miller, which is, a very, very strong culture, mission-driven organization, if you want to rise up a certain level within the company hierarchy, up beyond that, you have to take a course in storytelling, because it is regarded as such a critical competency to be able to energize people. You don't do that through PowerPoint. You don't do that through Excel. You do it through telling these visceral, powerful stories that move people. And so that's seen as being an absolutely key leadership competence. I see that Swati has their hand up. Was he as compassionate and authentic? Oh, before he had his son's disease? Yeah, I didn't know him then, so it's hard for me to answer. I will tell you, by the way, last time I talked to Brian, I asked him how his son was, and he said he'd just come back from playing golf. So that was pretty exciting. Why did I write these words down? I wrote these words down because I think what you've done here is come amazingly close to providing a job description for a mission-driven leader. That if you want to lead your organization by inspiring mission and purpose, these are the kinds of attributes that you as a leader need to cultivate. These are not necessarily the attributes that would show up on a board in an MBA class on day one. If I asked our students what makes for effective leadership, they might say things like forceful and, enigmatic and dominant and so forth. But these softer, more emotive qualities that you've all highlighted, research is showing us are precisely the kinds of qualities that help organizations leverage mission. And by the way, they are also the kinds of qualities that millennials and Gen Z tell us in surveys that they are looking for in their leaders. These are the qualities. They want visionary, inspiring, approachable, humble, socially conscious leaders. Swati, you had a comment or a question?
Swati, you should have the ability to speak. Can you unmute yourself?
Hi, I actually didn't have my hand up, so I'm not, maybe there's a problem here, but
Oh, okay.
sorry
No
for the
prob- No worries. So what does it take to be mission driven? First off, as I've just argued, I think it requires a particular approach to leadership, leadership that comes from the heart, that's based on approachability, emotion, which, by the way, also requires knowing your people well enough to know what is going to inspire them, what is going to speak to them, what kinds of stories are going to move them. That's not a one-size-fits-all formula. The traditional approach to motivation assumes people want more money rather than less. They want, more job security rather than less. Everybody's kind of the same in that respect. Leadership that is trying to tap into people's sense of purpose presumes that you as the leader know what their purposes are. And that requires a kind of in-depth understanding of people. It also requires an approach to decision-making where decisions are made not just based on whether they are optimal in terms of their consequences, but whether they are appropriate to the values and purpose of the organization. So decisions reflect not just a logic of consequences, but a logic of values or appropriateness. And so at Herman Miller, there are lots of examples where decisions were made that were incredibly costly and difficult or risky for the company to make that wouldn't have been made but for the values and mission that the organization had. For example, their iconic piece of furniture, the Eames chair, which is in the New York Museum of Modern Art, the contract for that chair specifies it must be manufactured in rosewood. But rosewood was the endangered hardwood. And so Herman Miller had to decide, what do we do? Do we stop producing it in rosewood to honor our values around sustainability and being good global citizens? And that will risk us being sued by the designers of the chair. And that's exactly what they did. Not an easy decision, not one that was optimal in terms of its economic consequences, but a decision that upheld the values and mission of the company. And similarly, a few years ago, they moved to offering full domestic partner benefits for their employees, despite having a very, very strong segment of their workforce that are fairly traditional in terms of their religious orientations, who had real problems with that posture. So examples where it's clear the company is standing for values and upholding those values in decisions that were difficult to make, but that needed to be made to communicate those values. I mentioned that millennials tell us that these are the qualities that they want. And if you look at this list, everything on here is similar to stuff that you all put on that slide. The one thing that you didn't say is that Brian Walker is a strategic thinker, and you couldn't have divined that from the short video clip that I showed you, but he very much is. And in fact, he has this wonderful quote that he's fond of articulating, which is, a mission without a strategy is just a slogan, and a strategy without a mission is just a to-do list, right? So you need to have a real business strategy that undergirds your mission. But if you simply have a strategy without a deeper purpose, it just is a bunch of tasks. The second thing that you need to be mission-driven is clearly to have a compelling and prominent statement of what you stand for, what your mission and purpose is. Can I wake people up who work for you in the middle of the night and shake them and say, what's the mission of your organization? And would I get an answer? And would it be the answer that you would hope that they would give? And the mission needs to articulate not just what you're about, but what you're not about. What are the things that you're not going to do? When I visited Herman Miller, they showed me very profitable kinds of airport seating that had been brought to them that they had just decided not to manufacture simply because they couldn't convince themselves it was an inspiring design that helps people do great things. So people can point to decisions that were made that were consequential, that were only made because of the mission and what it entails. What does a compelling mission look like? I think it has at least 9 qualities. It has a clear strategy associated with it. Ideally, it's something that's sufficiently measurable and tangible that you can track whether you're making progress towards your mission. It's enduring. If your mission is changing every week, it's not going to be a compelling mission. It should be short. It should be specific in that it precludes certain things. It should be unique or distinctive, something that generates a unique identity for the people in your organization. It should be ambitious. It should involve passion, and it should be something that people can make personal by translating it down into what does this mean for me and how I do my job. And these may seem like obvious things for a mission statement to have, but it's not very hard to find companies, even good companies, that didn't necessarily get this message. So here's the mission statement for Federal Express. Great company, but we produce superior financial returns for shareholders by providing high value added logistics, transportation, and related business services through focused operating companies. I don't know about you, but sort of that doesn't get me jumping out of bed in the morning, desiring to go devote my life to Federal Express. Perhaps a more positive example is Southwest Airlines, which a number of years back defined its mission as we exist to connect people to what's important in their lives through friendly, reliable, and low-cost air travel. So 2 great things about this mission statement. A compelling statement about how do we want to impact the world or the people that we care about? What are we striving to accomplish? And what are the critical behaviors that we need to cultivate in our people in order to do that? And Southwest reinforces this in all kinds of ways through shout outs from their CEO and reward and recognition programs, all kinds of stories that are publicized, and in their training and development activities. The third thing that it takes to be mission driven is a set of core values that are visible and that are clearly linked to your mission and to what your business is. And I don't have time to go into these in great depth, but these at the time that we wrote our case study were the 9 core values of Herman Miller. And I will say 2 things about this list. I mean, every company has core values, but what struck me as distinctive about Herman Miller is, first of all, these are core values that make a great deal of sense if you're in the business that Herman Miller is in. If you want to be a cutting edge design enterprise, then having these values, cultivating inclusiveness because the design community is a very diverse community, being transparent, trying to make the world better. These things make sense from a business point of view. And the second thing I'll say is that if you go and visit Herman Miller, you see these values everywhere. You see it in how the physical plant is organized. You see it in their personnel policies. You see it in how they engage customers. So these values are not just articulated, but they're clearly evident in the way that they lead and manage. And finally, related to that point, you need to have management practices that take your mission and your values and embed them in how the organization runs. Some of those practices I'm listing on this slide. So if you want to be mission driven, mission needs to drive how you think about recruitment and selection. You need to practice radical transparency. You need to cultivate core values. As I said, you need to rely less on, Excel and PowerPoint and quantitative approaches and more on symbols and storytelling. And you need to practice something that I like to call aspiration management, which is that as a manager, your goal shouldn't be simply to manage performance. It should be to manage aspirations, to understand the people that you're leading well enough and what drives them to be able to align the organization's goals with their goals. And that requires deep and frequent and personal conversations with the people that you're leading. And finally, it involves designing people's jobs in a way to give them more scope, more responsibility, more autonomy, and the like. I suggested that mission-driven enterprises require certain kinds of leaders, leaders who cultivate authenticity and approachability, and who leverage affect and emotion and storytelling, as well as the more traditional quantitative approaches to management, and who make decisions that clearly reflect not just their economic interests, but their social and personal goals and commitments. To do that, I would suggest you got to connect with your own higher purpose. I'm very unlikely to be able to enroll you in pursuing something that I stand for if I'm not clear what I stand for. So one of the things that this program will encourage its participants to be giving some thought to is clarity around what exactly is it that you stand for, that you could be effective in enrolling others. What are your values? What is your vision? And then the need to powerfully, relentlessly, and authentically articulate that over and over and over in all of the kinds of interactions and touch points that you have with your people, particularly for folks who are millennials and Gen Z. So that's a very hurried survey of this topic. Somebody once said the definition of a professor is you can talk for 5 minutes or 5 months with very little difference in content. So I've been forced to have to give you the 5-minute version, but these are some points that I hope you would think about. I see someone in the chat, Blanca, had a question and is trying to, would like to be unmuted. So please feel free to jump in.
Oh, hi, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Blanca. I'm currently a product manager. My question was just around like the difference between mission, vision, and principles. I feel like on the product side, there's like much more emphasis on principles, but wanted to kind of get your take on that.
Yeah, I mean, this is a topic that there's enormous kind of scholarly discussion about, and I kind of glossed over it because it can quickly become pedantic. I think most people would say mission is sort of what you stand for. Vision is the end state toward which you are striving. And principles, and to my mind, also culture, would be the means by which you intend to pursue those. It's what is okay, what do we embrace as the means by which we're going to pursue our mission? What are the practices and principles that we champion in pursuing that? So I hope that helps.
Yeah, thank you.
There's another question in the chat. Do you find these points to be applicable in the nonprofit industry, or is there a change?
Oops, sorry, I thing wasn't scrolling down, so I missed. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think nonprofit organizations are sort of inherently mission driven. It should be particularly compelling to be able to articulate a compelling mission in the nonprofit space. Having said that, lots of organizations, who are nonprofits don't do a very good job of leveraging the kind of powerful mission that they could easily leverage. Kristen mentioned we have a mission that's sitting over her left shoulder of educating leaders for business and society. It's a great mission. It's part of what caused me to come from Stanford to Yale, because I really buy into that mission. But having said that, we could do much more to engage the members of our community, particularly our staff, around that mission. We could have staff sitting in on teaching programs to see how the things that they do actually contribute to the educational mission that we're pursuing as an organization. I think nonprofits sometimes tend to be reluctant to do that because they regard anything that involves sort of focusing on employees as being extravagant and as detracting from the kind of deeper purpose of the organization, which is serving constituents. But I would say for nonprofits, it's incredibly important, and it's also incredibly congenial to being able to leverage mission and purpose, in part because oftentimes you don't have anything else to use as carrots and sticks for people because you're very resource constrained.
There was after that question, there was another one from Nicole. She's in higher education. How do you get employees to open up about what is important to them other than more money? And what are some good rewards and recognition ideas?
Yeah, great question. You know, for them to do that, they have to trust you, right? And for them to trust you, you have to build a relationship which takes time and effort and concern. You have to know them as people. You have to understand, you know, not just what's going on in their workstation, but what's going on in their life. What's going on in their family? What are they striving to accomplish? What are the challenges and opportunities that exist in their lives? You know, that requires conversations that I would say have to be at least weekly. You know, the notion, if you look at surveys, people often report that they talk about goals with their manager once a year or less, right? So how can you possibly know people well enough there to be able to craft, you know, a fit between what they're striving for and what you're striving for? My former colleague, Amy Rosneski, here at Yale, did this fascinating research on what she calls job crafting, where she's shown that giving people some latitude to be able to architect aspects of their job around the things that give them unique purpose and juice can be enormously beneficial, not just for them, but for organizational performance. And so I would say, you know, the starting point is establish trust-based relationships and think about whether there's opportunities to give people some latitude to do some job crafting, to be architects of their own job reality.
On the other end of that, I actually got a question that came through separately. Do you have suggestions for aligning your personal core values with your team and organization?
Not sure.
I believe the question is like, how do I feel comfortable sharing my personal core values with my team and my organization and building that alignment if I'm reluctant by nature to share those things?
Yeah, I mean, one of the first words that you all put up when I asked to describe Brian Walker was vulnerable. Right? This guy was trained as an accountant. Really interesting story. I mentioned that the workforce of Herman Miller is that they're in central Michigan. A lot of fairly conservative Christian workers in their organization. When he was made CEO, he didn't understand that. That was not him. He came to Yale and enrolled in the divinity school at Yale for a program so that he could focus in on learning about those religious commitments so that he could figure out, how am I going to be able to resonate with these people that I don't understand? I mean, I think that's a pretty powerful example of how, if you really want to tap into what people care about, you got to understand what they care about. And that may require building, you know, some knowledge.
Thank you. A question in the chat: what are the biggest pitfalls we need to look out for when transforming the mission of an organization?
In terms of changing it, you know, I think, first of all, you know, a little story. I used to teach at Stanford. One day I went on the website, and on top of the Stanford Business School logo, it said, "Changing lives, changing organizations, changing the world." And I looked at that and I thought, I didn't get that memo. I don't remember any meeting where we talked about that. It just showed up one day. And, you know, I looked into it, and what had happened is somebody in the PR department had decided that was a kind of catchy thing to have. Well, it inspired immense cynicism on the part of the faculty and the students, because it didn't affect anything. It wasn't linked to any changes in the kinds of endeavors that were being pursued. In contrast, if somebody proposes a new program at SOM, the faculty have to approve it. And the very first question that gets asked is this about educating leaders for business and society? And if it isn't, we don't do it. So the first thing I think you have to think about in crafting a mission is it a statement that abides with what the organization is really about, what it's willing to do and what it's unwilling to do? Is it a statement that people in the organization can mobilize behind? I remember I mentioned Brian Walker didn't come up with this mission statement. He had a very diverse task force of employees at all levels craft it, go and talk to people and find out what would get you jazzed, what would you stand for as a mission for the organization. So it needs to be credible, something people can buy into. It needs to be linked obviously to the strategy, and it can't change every week and a half. So those would be some things I think you want to be careful about.
Thank you, Professor. We have a couple more questions. We're at 1:45, everyone. So I'm going to take one or two more questions for Professor Barron, and then we'll wrap things up. From Jennifer in the chat, do you think there was a large shift post-COVID on the views, mission, purpose of organizations due to a shift in the values of stakeholders changing? If so, were organizations ready for this quick shift?
Yeah, that's a huge question. I'm very mindful of, my boss, Kristen here, has some stuff that she needs to talk about, and I don't want to chew up all of her time. I guess the one thing I would say is I think that what COVID did do is it did make this importance of mission even more paramount, because when people were remote, when they were not tapping into the day-to-day interactions that they had been before, understanding what they were about and why they were doing what they were doing became critical. Gallup did a survey recently where looking at millennials who are working remotely in the last few years, fewer than 40% said they understood what they were supposed to be doing. Right. Not why, but just what. Fewer than 40% understood what they were supposed to be doing, much less why. So I think that what COVID has done is to make mission even more powerful, because when you're not standing over people and you're relying on them to be kind of intrinsically pursuing the North Star that you want them to shoot towards, if they don't know what that is and you're not reinforcing it, you probably have a problem on your hands.
Thank you, Professor. I do have a couple farewell words to give and share. I see Angelica in the chat, and Beth, you sent me something separately in the Q&A. I plan on reaching out to you directly after the webinar, so stay tuned for an email from me, but I'd love to wrap things up here today. I want to
Before
thank
you do, can I just
Yep.
say james.baron, B-A-R-O-N, @yale.edu. If we didn't get a chance to talk about what you'd like to talk about, I'd love to hear from you.
Thank you. I will be sure to share that with both Beth, Angelica, and everyone on this call.
Thank you.
Thank you, Professor, for this insightful conversation, your discussion, your candor, and thank you everyone for joining our call today and for your fantastic questions. They were
Great questions. Great questions.
so great. We really appreciate your engagement. Our team, like I said, we're looking forward to connecting with you more one-on-one. We are hosting the Elevated Leadership Program this fall, and if you're interested, please consider applying. The application requirements include submitting a resume, CV, or your CV, and a letter of intent. And there are more details about the application and the application process on the website. We would love for you to attend, but if your path leads you in a different direction, we completely understand. Whatever path you choose, we hope that this time together was helpful and that we can be helpful along the way. As we said, my contact information, Professor Barron's, and more resources will be shared with you in a post-webinar email after the webinar. And so please let us know if you have any questions. With that, thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you again, Professor. We hope you enjoyed the webinar. Have a great rest of your day, everyone.
Be well, folks. Take care.